Hey guys, welcome back. Thank you very much. We're into the next leg. Now, as you would have seen in the programme, we'd originally arranged for Jim Coe to be here. Unfortunately, Jim has hurt his back. Jim, if you're watching, get well soon, mate. I know what a bad back's like, so all the best. But as we say in academia, not all heroes wear capes, and at the last minute, Alan Roberts has stepped up to fill Jim's place, also from Counterculture, so I'm delighted to introduce Alan Roberts. Thank you very much for being here, Alan. Cheers.
Like to be on a stage in this way. Hello. My job title is a continual, a kind of weird thing for me. It's partner and director of Western Europe, which is quite despotic, so I try not to use it. So in case you're wondering what it means, is generally I talk to universities and student unions on mainland Europe and other countries, so I don't know why they focus on Western Europe, but that's all it really means. I haven't got like a control room with some missiles or anything like that. That's not what I do. Although I do own a cat who's very angry. So, yeah, I'm from Counterculture, and Counterculture, we're a consultancy, we work in higher education, but that's probably, this is not the official spiel, that's probably about a fifth of our work, I would say. The other 4/5 are in arts, culture, heritage, those spaces, everything from, and I say this because I find it bewildering and beautiful as a bass player that I get to work amongst these people but not need to sing. That like museums, art galleries, publishing law, anything weird like that, it's all kind of fun, weird and wonderful. And working with HE just mixes it all up, and I get the pleasure of working between those worlds a little bit with Counterculture. The session that Jim was going to deliver, that I will attempt to deliver, is essentially around HE policy. It's less on the pedagogy and more around the economics. And I will try not to dwell on it too much, although it is basically 90% of the presentation. I want to try and mix her up a little bit, and I tried to see how dark it is over there. From here, it looks impenetrably dark. But what I might do is just try and get you into two clusters, but in a bit, just so you can talk in two groups about a problem. James says sorry. He does have a bad back, and he has near endless childcare problems in Liverpool. He lives in Liverpool, but's from the northeast. I am from Liverpool, but live in Walthamstow, so that's our trade in terms of that. Well, let's go. So, how the sector broke. Our starting point is really that the expansion of higher education has been a good thing. It's allowed people who would otherwise not have had the opportunity to benefit from a university education to get one. The different modes of learners in different kinds of institutions has meant that there's more opportunity for more people to get a qualification, which will improve their life chances. But there's still no tool better for improving life chances than a higher education qualification of some kind. So although we might talk about, and I'll talk in a moment about graduate outcomes and stuff like that, and I mean, we're in the arts, so like the kind of the negative premium that gets spoken about a lot of the time, it still is a kind of, it becomes like a basic need in terms of this, in terms of a predeterminant. The trade-off is that expansion's not free. The expansion's been made possible by introducing and then increasing tuition fees, and it's given higher education institutions the money they need to do the work they do. But it's also come at an expense to the public purse and public opinion, ergo. By proxy, tuition fees also introduce conversations about whether HE is value for money, both on its own terms, but questions like, is the academic and student experience I'm having worthwhile? And secondly, am I getting the graduate outcomes that reward my investment? And arguably, you could say on that second one, the public are asking the version, is the country getting the graduate outcomes that are worth its taxable investment? In music, and more the performance side, the National Musician Census in 2023 showed, and you probably know this, but 70% of working players hold a degree, but 43% still earn less than 14k from music. In other words, the credential is necessary but not sufficient. The payoff comes later, often through multiple revenue strands. I've got a bit of a background in working with fine artists and galleries and studio management, and it echoes there as well. Fine art graduates tell the same story. The median artist scrapes about 12.5k a year, a decade on from graduation. Creative careers mature slowly. And so a 15-month salary snapshot, let's say in the Leo or something like that, is the wrong yardstick, and I'm probably preaching to the converse on these kind of metrics, but it's worth considering while we're talking about the value economically to society, and that those kind of where people see those metrics. It's why many like maybe you, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, might argue that the metrics need to evolve to track freelance earnings, IP royalties, streaming income, or even audience reach. There are different ways of measuring impact that are beyond income. I mean, look at healthcare, for example. We'll try and quantify economically the value of a functioning healthcare system in terms of illness and stuff like that, but still the point is to make people better, not to make money off them. And so the metrics don't measure, like I read a really interesting one today, described it as the long runway for arts and creative. Now, where am I at here? There we go. So, look, the current crisis the sector finds itself is one of, I would say, simple economics, but with complicated and complex sort of powers at play. The amount of tuition fees that a provider can charge, or at least where they have recourse to public loan, is limited to $9,250. And from next year, it will rise with inflation. However, what this means is that the income to providers has been stuck. I mean, stuck is a generous way. It's been in real time decreasing over recent years or even the last decade. One of the other challenges is that providers generally don't know the marginal cost of recruiting every extra student. The usual response to a reduction in income would be an increase of a unit of resource. In providers, that is students. But this is not a quirk of the system, it is the system and how it was designed. Income follows the student around, but the problem is that it's not clear how much it is to teach those students, because they need facilities and resources. I've got a co-presenter, which is a fly that just keeps on doing that around my head. It's really... Analysis by the Russell Group, for example, suggests that to their members, all programme kinds are now being taught at a loss to home undergrad students. Now, they will have their reasons for making that argument, and you can frame it to be the truth, but it's probably reasonably true if you look at the subsidy from postgraduate taught and international students. And that brings us on to another conversation in a moment. Again, this is an absurd way to organise a higher education system. The only measure of whether a programme can stay open, really, is not whether it contributes to the economy, or whether it gives students a wonderful time, or whether it's academically rich. It's whether the market rewards the institution with the attraction of home and international students into a programme. The market rewards market behaviour. This equilibrium can hold while international students continue to grow. And, you know, spoiler alert. To be clear, international students' fees subsidise absolutely everything that universities do, and their fees are uncapped. Providers will charge what they think the market will allow. International student fees subsidise research. They subsidise teaching, and they make expansion in the States possible, for example. It gets in everywhere. It's the success story of higher education in the last decade, at least, that it's internationally competitive. However, it comes at a cost, effectively the viability of HE. A whole system which is necessary for the viability of the country, arguably in terms of the economy, is itself only made viable, lots of use of the verb to be viable there, by a source of income that the government actually has no say in. It can nudge, it can influence, but it doesn't have any say in the actual income. Unless you, like, completely state-own a lot of it and you know, solid centre, which I don't think is going to happen any day soon. They can pass laws for visas. They can make the UK a more or a less attractive place to work and be and study. But the UK's national asset is reliant on the winds of geopolitics, global education, and the market, once again, Adam Smith's hand. This system is fine while higher HE is in high demand globally. It works less well when changing international relationships and immigration skepticism change things at home. There we go. And this is the financial crisis we're now in. The OFS projections suggest 75 providers will, by 25-26, have fewer than 30 days net cash flow. To be clear, this means that they have less than a month's cash on hand to pay their various outgoings, which is an incredibly risky position to be in. However, it speaks to a wider truth and a bigger challenge. The UK's HE system is in a bad place because its income is either eroded or uncertain. Providers can cut, they can save, and they will have to change, but the fundamental model makes the whole system shaky and the consequences are profound. I was in Manchester University yesterday and we were having this conversation with a bunch of Northwest universities, and really the thing was, one of the Pro-Vice-Chancellors was saying, if you just cut my budget by 20% and tell me that that's what the truth is, I can respond to it. But if it's doing that, I don't know what my response is. The uncertainty was worse than the cut, was what that PVC was saying. One of the profound consequences is that it damages the whole HE system. To take one significant example, it's different in different institutions, but it's still, people don't often link tuition fees to this. The UK research system doesn't cover its own costs. Notionally, the full economic cost of research is about 80%, and that means that universities normally find the other 20%, and that comes from tuition fees for the most part. As they either decline or international student fees struggle, the whole research system then also comes under threat. So once again, the sector's burdened by this system. This slide, that big line going up there, basically says that fees are the only real game in town. Everything else is kind of stable, but fees have been going up as the form of income. And this, look, I'll give you a minute to read it, but basically it emphasises the UKRI's report on the importance, well, I suppose the precarity of the funding system and its relationship with research. Just towards the end, the present underpinning of UK university research by other commercial income sources, notably fees by international students, is valuable, but they're not always reliable and sustainable. And that's where the geopolitics is getting involved in that space now. I'm giving you a sec to read. Currently, there's no plan to fix this, which makes one of 4 outcomes possible. Providers hope something comes along. Providers find something to merge with, but that's extremely difficult. Providers close. That's both rare, difficult, but not impossible. Or providers that already have cash to undertake transformation programs do so, and change costs as well, both in terms of emotion, labour, and dollar, or pound, as I should more appropriately say. So, what's the new political consensus in this space? There's a skills white paper due, and it's likely there'll be reforms which seek to align the worker providers closer to what the labour market needs, as expressed in the industrial strategy. That might mean some funding reforms. Maybe it looks at pre- and post-degree qualifications, a bigger or different role for Skills England, for example, and maybe some ideas of new kinds of regulation. The Labour Party's mission is growth, and growth is the only hope that they have growing the economy. Funding for universities, funding for universities will not go up as a new cash settlement, and it's extremely unlikely there'll be any kind of fee rises or new cash. We might get changes and tinkering in the actual loan system. I was talking again yesterday about like the money that is allocated to tuition fees isn't budget expenditure. It's accounted for differently. You probably know this. And largely speaking, countries, certainly the UK, will fund it based on bonds. And it's really about whether they get the money back and how much it costs at the other end of it. And so they could, the most effective and most unpopular thing they could do would be to change the interest rate on loans. But, you know, what's the weather going to be like for that? But that would essentially fix it, but not in the right way. It's simply not the place the government's in. They may, however, receive the funding through other government priorities. We'll get into this a little bit. For example, universities that can demonstrate their work in defence will succeed. I'm not sure what the link is with arts and defence, but there could be. But that's a good example, I suppose, where you link in priorities. And this is a government that will seek intervention in the regions. They're already looking at a new devolved research funding, infrastructure spend, and in a recent paper, I mean, I'll tell you about James in a minute. I think what this shows is the different parts of investment in research and how differential it is in the different regions across the UK. And trying to level that, there's old language in it, trying to level that up is without squashing it down is going to be the policy trick for government. James, who would have been able to speak to this better, I will admit, this bit I can't really cover for. He wrote this bit, tooling up. James and his colleagues called for a settlement which gives regional mayors greater say in funding arrangement for skills, for the provision of which HE would be a part of that. Again, if the mission is to grow the economy, it's got to be done by closing regional inequalities, or at least that's what the argument is within the policy framework. And it would include infrastructure investments and further exploration to projects like the OxCam arc. The spending review brought in large amounts of new capital while squeezing day-to-day spending, and that's where we're at financially. Don't worry, I will get onto some more activities in a minute instead of just talking economics. So, what can be done and what would I focus? God, if I had to focus on a white paper, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably take a little holiday to start with and then go for it. So what would we focus on for a white paper? 3 things around specific. I'll quickly show you the titles of these slides so you know where you're at. There's 3: specificity, assets and governance, and value add and value creation. Let me go back to specificity. So research strategy under funding pressure is what this one's really about. Oh, I've pressed the button there. I didn't mean to do that. Sorry. Research strategy under funding pressure. So the first thing here is about prioritising ruthlessly. Any wider research funding deficit means universities can't back every good idea. I mean, that's kind of common sense. You've got to decide which kind of research, frontier, foundational, teaching-informed, etc., you resource, and be explicit about what you won't resource. There's some elements about how you match research strategy to what your other institutional purposes or what your kind of mission is. Like, there's something about, like, I don't know, knowing your onions and investing in them. Align and disaggregate. Make sure each research strand lines up with the institution's civic and regional goals. Specify who it serves and how it will be funded. Avoiding catch-all strategies that simply list existing projects. Around assets and governance, that's more like regional research propositions. So there's kind of 2 playbooks in this. Amplify the existing assets into high-value clusters through collaboration, or coordinate latent but underconnected assets or sleeping assets so that they become more than the sum of their parts. Largely, it's a collaborative agenda, I suppose, in this one, but just trying to find it's either something that's overt or something that you haven't thought that you've got a resource for another partner that you can both collectively make more out of if you partner on it. Getting the mix right is obviously really important, and mapping those strongest assets, choosing the right partners and the governance model of that, respecting geographical boundaries and keeping the plan flexible to be able to bend with it as the national priorities will shift. Some of the policy that will come out, well, all policy is a test, really. It's not an exact science, so you sort of, economics is a philosophy as much as it is a maths. And so being able to be flexible and respond, have a kind of theory of change approach to it. And this value add and value creation is around specificity again, looking at the difference between impact and funding. So a shift from value capture to value add, focus less on what's funded us and more on what the research delivers. Now, I know that that's a type of research that's, I know that's a specific, it's not curiosity-based research when you start doing it that way, but research impact on the economy is the way that the government's trying to frame this, and that's probably the path of least resistance in one respect. Talk in terms that benefits matter to talk in benefits that matter to recipients and not just to academics, which is an interesting, like, your kind of public face, your knowledge exchange piece, and how you sit in the cultural strategies and your regional sort of fabric. And then playing in the biggest arena strategically. Most new money sits outside of quality research, in spin-outs, in the private sector, aligning bids with government missions, with local partnerships, and pick only interventions your university and your institution is uniquely placed to lead and coordinate its efforts for consistency. Now look, that's a lot of stuff on economics. I get that, and it's all a bit gloomy. And I recognise that these, oh God, that's meant to have text on it and say those 3 things. That's brilliant. Those 3 things I just said, value adding creation, assets and governance, and specificity, which would go in that. That's a nice little blank. Here's a slide, do that. It's easier said than done. And like the opportunities and future opportunities, establish strategies and messages and clarity on which research and where. Governance, integrating research for civic purpose, evaluation with a purpose. Like the government is putting things in place for you to respond to that if you want to and you need to. It's a choice. But I wondered whether something that would be useful to do, actually, to see the time, 4:05. Awesome. For the last, what time's this session until, Poppy? Okay, we can do, right, what I'll do, right, so for the last bit, I wondered whether I dare try and do some conversation between you, and I wonder whether, is it feasible, lecture theatre, I haven't done it, maybe 2 or 3 groups, all you need to do is just talk to some people close to you, is the principle. I'm going to give you, people on this side, you'll get a rule each, a new kind of economic rule about how your institution works. And what I'd like you to do, it's useful to write these down, is you'll first of all go, that's ridiculous, that's nonsense, and that is damaging. You want to write down the things that are bad about it, right? And that's the first task. So I'm just going to tell, I haven't got it on the screen, I'm just going to tell you it. So on the right, in whatever way you want to cluster, you can cluster into 2 groups, whatever's comfortable because of it. Similarly, on the left, it looks to me like 1, 2, maybe 3, and I can just about see people at the back. Hello. So maybe, you could do it in pairs if you want. I won't talk to everyone. So the rule on the right, I'm going to say, from next year, all university programs must demonstrate positive return on investment for both students and the state in order to remain open. So a very centralized, you have to demonstrate positive return on an ROI for both students and the state to stay open, right? That's your rule. You can't change the rule. I would start by listening, therefore, what problems does that create for you as an institution where you are? On the left, your one is going to be, from 2026, all undergraduate degree programs, or higher education programs, must be designed around a specific regional economic priority. I want to start with what problems might that create for your mythical Mid-Sticks University and the Mid-Sticks College of Art, right? So there's your 2 Middle England institutions. So what problem does it, all your degrees must be designed around a regional priority, and all yours have to demonstrate clear return on investment for students and the state in order to stay going. Just for like 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 5, my watch is going wild. Let's just list some of the problems that those rules create. Yeah, sorry, I know it's a bit dark. Some of you could come on stage if you want. So yeah, we're focusing on the problems, the kind of symptoms. If I can give you a tip for this bit, the more specific the problems you articulate, the better. So has everyone got like 2 or 3 problems? Everyone got 2 or 3 problems you've worked up? Because the next bit is for each of your problems. Old-fashioned, it's the enemy of anyone that runs a students' union, risk assessment time. So for each problem, I'd like you to respond to them as a kind of risk. And your job is to think of a mitigation, reduce the likelihood, reduce the impact when it happens, or offset in some way. Just think of one action, and it's easier said than done, I get that, because I can't imagine what problems you've written down, but some of them you'll be able to mitigate in and of themselves. So other than removing the rule, what mitigation? Give us one mitigation for each problem you've articulated. Let's have another 2 minutes on this. 2 minutes. Seven minutes, okay. Okay, so presumably you've got some problems, you've got some solutions. I'd try and do this for like an hour normally, but I need to sort of stop you. So Mid-Sticks University and Mid-Sticks College of Art. I am interested in hearing 1 or 2 of the problems that you've raised and your solutions to them. But the point is, to some extent, these are false circumstances. They are echoed in the kind of policy agenda a bit. But I wonder whether, rather than getting you to feedback your problems and solutions, there's one last act you can do with this that you've written down, is you can delete the rule that I gave you. So delete the kind of answering to government and the return on investment, delete the rule that says regional. Then, therefore, you automatically delete all the problems that it creates. However, I would like you and invite you to look at your offsets in isolation. So all of your risk responses, ignore the rest and just look at your risk responses. And I'm really interested if any of you came up with any interesting ideas that would be good to do anyway. So if you just take a moment to consider all of your risk responses in isolation of the rule and the problems, what does that list look like to you, or those 2 or 3 things? Anything feasible? And you can shout it out if you want. Can't see. The longer you do, particularly the first bit, you allow people to sink into mid-sticks university and you're able to project more. But so go ahead. What have you? Oh, you got a microphone as well. Go ahead.
Hi. So yeah, so we thought that we were talking. Our main point of contention was this return on investment concept, and so our solution to that was having, what does that mean? How do you measure return on investment? And so we decided you need a broad range of metrics by which to define return on investment, because it will be different depending on the student and how you measure value. Then but we felt that the one that was most sort of accountability to the taxpayer was the easiest one to sort of isolate and think about how you might respond to it. And we were just about to debate that, about how one solution that was proposed was that you put money behind your programs that are the ones that are going to ensure that return on investment. Right. And I was just about to say to Tony that this is sort of what's happening in our university at the moment, and it's why the humanities and the arts have just been abandoned, and our business school, psychology department and law degrees are being are in rude health comparatively, and everything else is being sort of sidelined. And I think this may be your distinction between your kind of art college and your kind of broad church university, is that may work within an art college, but within a university like ours, you undermine any sense of an interdisciplinary spectrum. And those synergies that you want to happen just won't happen, and that will have a deleterious effect on the kind of knowledge you generate and the kind of education you provide. I'm going on my own diatribe now, so I'm going to pass on to my
I haven't given you nearly enough time to sort of dig into and pull it apart, but I understand your problem about the kind of institutional cross-subsidy, about different subjects working together and the magic that happens when that happens, versus being able to sort of, as mid-sticks arts, stand up and go, these are the arts, and that's all in your broadcast agenda at that point, isn't it, in terms of public affairs and public opinion? Any interesting ideas come from mid-sticks university? I mean, you don't have to be mid-sticks universities, by the way. I just need to make you get out your head a little bit.
We took that, we moved slightly, so we moved to Guildford, specifically because of where we are today. In relation to that, one particular theme came up at the end in relation to where our institutions are situated. So this idea that Guildford has and Surrey County Council has, as a lot of other counties have at the minute, is a devolved sort of responsibility to the township that they're in. So regeneration, being part of the community, these sorts of things. Institutions like ACM, like ICMP, are very uniquely placed because we're already in those spaces, and we're not separate. If you're a larger institution off-site, it's a much bigger problem to solve. But within that, if you take again this space particularly, there's a regeneration project happening at the minute around the river. It's, that would be our response to that, be involved with it effectively.
So leading into regeneration and the kind of development of the area.
It's probably, if it is council partnerships and communicative dialogue between those requirements and the institution.
Thank you. Any other ideas from the back that you might respond to? Just behind you, Angela.
Yeah, in terms of needing to make the programs region-specific and to address basically, what the region needs. We flipped it actually because Guildford's, a very privileged middle-class area, generally speaking. There are areas of need and underprivileged, but we flipped it a little bit and asked ourselves, well, what would a university under these stipulations look like in an underprivileged area? And the fact is that people of certain polar quintiles, it's a little old-fashioned terminology, but in areas of underprivilege, they generally don't go to university. So where are the universities in those areas anymore? Where is the access to education? Where is the equality and inclusivity? And then so we're really left reverting it back to nice, safe Surrey. We're back to the old age of privilege buying education. And that's not levelling out or levelling up at all. That's levelling down. Absolutely, yeah.
And I know that like there's Warwick Uni's doing study into cold spots, but like if you look at like Anglia Ruskin and the Peterborough campus is an answer to the kind of critique you've got there. But there are plenty of cold spots around the country, and you probably can't do it all. And this group, Angela, you had your hand up.
I wouldn't be from IHE if I hadn't insisted on talking about really niche specialist provision. My point that I forced the group to talk about was that you can't always have a regional problem fixed by one specific small specialist institution. So the problem you set, I made it really harder by talking about that. But the solution we eventually came up with was sharing expertise across institutions so that you could solve a regional problem elsewhere with your own expertise if their region was suffering from something they needed your help with. And so that, because your question back to the group was what would you keep from your solutions, and it would be that greater collaboration to solve regional issues with your own expertise.
So both inter-regional and intra-regional.
Yes. Thanks for summing that up really nicely.
All right. No, thank you. I mean, that's me. I'm done. I did have another. Their constraints. If I have another 10 minutes, I've got a freedom for you. So and you can respond to a freedom differently. This is almost mythical, but I'll tell you anyway, just as a takeaway thought. I would have done. Your freedom is for the next 3 years, you're not required to submit any data to national regulators about student satisfaction, graduate outcomes, or continuation rates. What would you do with this freedom to focus on meaning and not just measurement? What kind of things would you invent? What becomes important to you as an institution yourselves in that environment? But we haven't got time for that, but I'll let you sort of like wonder about that and talk about it over pints or whatever happens after the panel debate. But anyway, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much indeed, Alan. That was really insightful and really interesting. I was thinking, because Alan's going to be part of the panel shortly anyway, maybe we could have a quick break now, and then if there were any questions that link to that, because that was quite an overview of the HE sector generally, it might be good for the panel anyway, if that's okay. So if we take 10 minutes now, where are we at time-wise? I think we're slightly over, aren't we? Oh no, we're okay. This is good. 4:35 back in here, please, if that's okay, guys.
Cheers. Thank you.